any background noises that we may experience. Also, as you have questions, please feel free to put any questions in our chat box. So we have members monitoring, and we will be able to answer your questions as we go along. Let me tell you a little bit about our chapter and what we do. The Central Texas Association of Black Social Workers is located within the city of Waco. We are the newest local chapter of the National Association of Black Social Workers, which is a network of individuals committed to enhancing the quality of life and empowering people of African ancestry through advocacy, human services delivery, and research. So we're starting out and we're getting out there and getting our name out there and just trying to be in the community and do all the great stuff that social workers and all those professions that help others do. I'm going to introduce some of our members, some of our founding members and our officers that are here with us today. Founding member and advisor, we have Miss Pamela Twitty. If you could just wave. Good morning. And Miss Sharpay Redrick, good morning. And myself. For membership and engagement, we have the wonderful, great Miss Trania Cooper. Secretary Jamie McKinney. Hi, Jamie. Vice President Najia Smith. Her camera's not on, but she's here. And our wonderful and great president, Dr. Cherie Chevelle. Now, our guest speaker is Dr. Vincent Walford. Dr. Vincent Walford completed his undergraduate studies at Baylor University and obtained a master's in public health from Morehouse School of Medicine with a specialty in health education and health promotion. He pursued and completed his doctoral training in counseling psychology from Howard University and completed his clinical internship with the University of Houston Counseling Center. From there, he completed a postdoctoral trauma fellowship at the Michael E. DeBakey VA Medical Center. Without further ado, I present to you Dr. Vincent Walford. Dr. Vincent, you're on mute still.
Can y'all hear me now? Okay, there we go, there we go. Okay, so again, I wanna say thank you to the Central Texas Association of Black Social Workers for inviting me to be y'all's first speaker. That's a lot of pressure, but I'm ready for it. I'm ready to tackle it on. I'm so proud of y'all and the accomplishments that y'all have done so far. And a special shout out to my friend, Miss Cooper, for asking me to be the speaker today. And so I've known her from my days working at Baylor. And she's been a great inspiration to the students. She loves her students, and like all social workers that I know, she's about the business. So again, just want to appreciate that. So before I get started talking about trauma, one of the things that I like to talk about are like to just preface everybody. You know, I really don't like to go into specifics about different traumatic events for people because I don't know where everybody's at as far as with levels, and you know, some of those topics could be very triggering. So one of the things, so how I wanted to lay out the presentation was first, just go over what is trauma, what does it look like, some coping mechanisms for trauma. Then I wanted to briefly talk about African Americans or Black individuals and their experience with trauma, what that looks like. And then wanted to end it with a vignette. So that way we can all come together and utilize our skills and talk about how we work with individuals who have experienced trauma, okay? So does that work for everybody so far? We good to go? Okay. So when I think about trauma, I want to go with the DSM-5 definition of trauma, which is that is when a person is exposed to death, threatened death, actual or threatened serious injury, or actual or threatened sexual violence in the following ways. So we think about direct exposure. So that's like me, the individual, I've actually experienced the trauma or the traumatic event. Then we have those who have witnessed the trauma. So it could be an individual bystander who sees something happen to an individual who experienced a traumatic event. Okay, can y'all hear me now? Okay, I got muted by accident. So,
Yes.
okay, and so, so again, so those individuals who are in direct exposure to details of the trauma. So I think about our first responders, our medics. Those are all individuals. All those individuals lie under the umbrella of trauma. And so, as we know, everyone processes trauma differently. Me and two other people can be in a car accident, right? And so all three of us can experience that event totally different. And what makes trauma become so problematic is the symptoms that can develop and the duration of those symptoms. And as we know, that leads to what we call PTSD. All right. And some of those symptoms, and we won't go too technical, but I want to just address the physical and the emotional reactions to trauma. So when we think about the physical reactions to trauma, we think about headaches, we think about stomach aches, we think about sudden sweating or heart palpitations when we're talking about or thinking about the traumatic experience or the traumatic event. We think about the change in our sleep patterns. You know, we may be used to getting 6 to 8 hours of sleep, but now we're constantly having those thoughts about the traumatic event. And then we even think about, as far as physical reactions to trauma, startled responses to noise. And so it makes me think about when I first moved to Houston for my internship. For everybody knows that I do not like football. Football is not my thing. You know, I'm a basketball, baseball person, but for some reason, people would give me these Houston Texans tickets for free. And so I would go to the game, and at the beginning of the game, and if anybody scores if the Texan scores a touchdown, you hear this big like cannon just explode. And so I'm thinking about the individuals who I work with who may have had some type of trauma experience, to think about how anxiety provoking that would be to hear these loud noises, and it takes you back to the experience that you had. So those are some of the physical reactions to trauma. So when we think about the emotional reactions, we think about anxiety, we think about guilt, we think about shame, we think about feelings of hopelessness or feeling hopeless, anger, having mood swings, and just being irritable. Okay. And so those are some of the reactions to trauma, right? So then how do people cope with trauma? So we know that we have some individuals who cope with trauma in a negative way or have negative coping skills when it comes to trauma. And so two of the things that I want to highlight, and there's definitely more, but two of the things I want to highlight is, one is substance abuse, right? So alcohol and drug use. So I did when I was in DC at Howard, the best HBCU this side of heaven. I got to give that shout out. I was in Howard, and I was in DC, and I was working for an externship where I was working with individuals who had substance abuse. It was a study I was on for Suboxone, and these individuals were struggling with addiction with heroin. And so, and I don't have a lot of the research, ready for this, but this is my own personal experience. I never met anybody who was in substance abuse, right? Or who was considered an addict who said, I woke up one day and I just wanted to use drugs. Everybody has some form of trauma that was connected to their drug use. And so it made me feel more empathetic and show more compassion towards those individuals because they're just trying to survive. And so unfortunately, drugs and alcohol is not a positive way or a good coping mechanism, but again, it's just part of their whole survival network. And so, it made me feel, again, more empathy towards that individual. And I also think about avoidance. There's some people that you may work with who have experienced some type of traumatic experience and they just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to address it. They want to say, they'll tell you that, if I don't even think about that, I won't have those issues. And as we know, the more you hold it in, the more it peeps out in other ways of your life. But we do know that there's some definitely positive coping mechanisms, and of course, some of those ways are number one is therapy, individual and group therapy. Let's all go like this for therapy. We know that's a great thing. Amen. And so when I was in at the VA, two of the things that we learned as a trauma fellow was the two what they call gold standard ways of dealing with trauma. And so the first one is prolonged exposure, which is where our clients are encouraged to re-experience the traumatic event in a safe and supportive environment, and eventually engage in activities they've been avoiding because of the trauma. And so that's what's one way called a prolonged exposure. The other way is called cognitive processing therapy, in which is clients learn to identify, challenge, and develop a more balanced thinking for trauma. Now, of the two, I'm more of a CPT person, and the main reason why is because there's a lot of modalities that are in the curriculum that they can use it outside in different areas of their life, not just trauma. There's also, we encourage people to mobilize a support system. So reach out to others who may have had experience some of the same traumas that you have. That's why it's so important. Group therapy is amazing. Support groups are amazing. Again, that goes on with the experience of coping with trauma. We also encourage people to engage in relaxation exercises. So like yoga, stretching, listening to relaxing music. Prayer and meditation is important. For those people who have a relationship with a higher power, maybe incorporating those things in your therapy sessions would be great too. We also think about art and journaling. Art therapy, journaling, all those are great things for trauma. And just writing down the experience, being able to finally talk about it and share it are some positive ways of coping. And one of the things that people are usually most surprised about when it comes to talking about trauma is the reactions of trauma can last longer than expected. For some individuals, the symptoms can last a week. For some individuals, it can last a month, and for some people, it could be a struggle for years. And the purpose and the goal, like I always tell people of therapy, just to keep it short and simple, is that working on trauma is helping you get that equilibrium, that balance back in life. And one of my supervisors told me this when I was going through the trauma fellowship, was that we cannot erase the event. We can't do that. But what we can do, we can help you manage your symptoms around that event. And so that was and I think a lot of people, that helps them kind of validate what they went through, was that, yeah, you're not telling me to forget it. You're not telling me just to move on. You're telling me that, yes, are you validating, yes, that it happened, but let's try to find some ways to manage those symptoms better so you're not having all these negative symptoms. And so for some people, we talked about the baseline. And again, and one of the things too, and I used to say this at the beginning and I forgot, was that when working with individuals with trauma, if you yourself have experienced trauma, I always encourage people to do your own work first. And the reason why I say that is that a lot of times when you're helping people with trauma, sometimes it can trigger the things that you have been struggling with. And so, and by doing that, you may not be helping the client as much as you can. So a guy named Ron Peters, I met years ago, when I was working on my master's in public health, told me, in order to be the best help to somebody else, you got to first help yourself. And I did not understand what that meant. I felt like that was so selfish. But what he's saying was, you have to be your best you, especially when you're working with individuals with trauma. And so, so part of that is, if you've experienced some trauma your own self and you have not done the work, I definitely would encourage you to do that work. So now let's talk about trauma and African Americans, Black people, however we want to identify that. And so when I think about that, the first thing I think about is historical trauma. And I think about, and reason why I think about historical trauma when I think about Black people and trauma is that we've been through so much over the years. And so when I think about historical trauma, the definition I want to give is caused by events that target a group of people. Thus, even family members who have not directly experienced the trauma can feel the effects of the event generation later. And let me just read that one more time so we can really feel that. It's caused by events, so this is historical trauma. It's caused by events that target a group of people. Thus, even family members who have not directly experienced the trauma can feel the effects of the event generations later. So think about all the stuff as Black people that we done went through. Slavery. I think about, we still feel those effects, right? I think about colorism. We still feel those effects. I think about Jim Crow. public lynching of people that look like us. I think about housing laws. I think about segregation, civil rights movement, seeing our leaders being killed in the streets. I think about the fear of not being accepted in the American dream. I think about the killing of Black people by our law enforcement. And, and all this exposure, we can also see it on social media consistently. So when I think about all of that, right, and I also think about what it means to be a Black person right now or African American right now in America, and then on top of all that, you may experience some type of traumatic experience. That's a lot. That's a lot. And so when I think about that, I have to sit back and say, we should have been doing this work a long time ago of what it looks like to help African Americans deal with trauma. So, so I want you to think as a clinician, and just thinking about trauma, thinking about the things that I've said, our historical trauma, our past trauma, and thinking about the experience of trauma in general. What are some things that we can incorporate in our work? Okay, so I just got a couple brief things. These are some of the things that have helped me. There's hundreds and hundreds of more things, but these are some of the things that I feel like are helpful. One is just hearing and validating the experience of the client. A lot of times when I work with individuals, they'll say, I've maybe have done therapy before, or I've done therapy before, and I just couldn't even get my story out because the clinician I was with was trying to stop me or trying to direct me in a certain path. I know we all have these different modalities that we go by, but when we're talking about trauma, one of the most helpful things is just that the client is heard. And this could be from events in the past, future. You can talk about what are those symptoms like in the present, and let them tell their story. And one of the things that I try to do, or what I try to avoid, is saying I understand, because a lot of times with trauma, I don't understand it. I don't know what it feels like to be in the military and see somebody get killed. I don't know what it feels like to be sexually assaulted. All these things I don't understand. But what I will say was that I do experience the term or the feeling of trauma. And that's maybe a way we can connect. But as far as your actual event, I don't understand that, and that's okay. But what we'll do together as we're working together, hopefully you'll share your experience, and that way we can work through those symptoms. I also think about identify current coping mechanisms, like I said, earlier, previously. So how are you coping with all your trauma, right? Some people may say, I'm going to church, I'm talking to my pastor. Fine, let's see how we can utilize that, plus the techniques that I know. Some people may say, what, I'm drinking Crown Royal, or I'm drinking 3 glasses of wine a night. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's see, that's not something healthy that we want to do. What are some ways we can incorporate healthier coping mechanisms? So just and do it in a non-shaming way. So if there's some things that people are doing and you wouldn't do, like I'm not a big alcohol person, right? So if somebody tells me they're drinking 4 glasses of wine a night, and I'm looking at them like 4 glasses, that doesn't help the client out. It really doesn't. But it does. But how you can identify that is that in the past, that is a way that you have coped with your trauma. In the future, let's work on some more healthy ways. I also think about you might have to incorporate outside resources besides just individual therapy. And I tell a lot of the clients that I work with, it's like school, right? If I meet with you for an hour a week or an hour every 2 weeks, and we do great work, but you're not doing the work outside of the classroom, you're not going to be learning any skills or tools, or you're not going to be able to put those tools into work. So I also talk about incorporating, if people say, they go to church and they feel like their pastor is helpful, doing that. Incorporating family members that they say, what, there's some family members that I know who have been very helpful, who continue to encourage me and continue to pour into me. I say, add that into your toolbox. And then again, support groups. Support groups are so great and so helpful. And I know sometimes we may be in some of these cities where they're not support groups, but I think we're in such a great time and space for technology. We have Zoom. So, now that there may be other ways that you can engage or incorporate people in those type of things. And also, and finally, just help them identify what is trauma. I always think about that when one of the individuals I worked with, at a college that I was at who had some years of physical abuse by a parent. And so when we were talking about her symptoms and we were talking about, what brought her to therapy, she didn't even know that what she had went through was trauma. And so part of my job was not to force her to or spoon feed her to say, now this is trauma. This is trauma, right? But my job was to just educate her on the symptoms of trauma, what that looks like, and let her be able to say, okay, those are some of my experiences, and then we were able to work. So really identifying trauma and how the client's current symptoms fit into that. Okay. So that's just a brief presentation on trauma, a brief presentation on trauma and working with African Americans. And so I want us to think about together as we close. I want us to think about how we deal with trauma, right? How we deal with trauma with some of our own in our own work. And so what I wanted to do, so for me, when I do presentations or when I go to presentations, I like vignettes because it's good. I understand I can go and sit and listen and take notes and maybe ask questions, but I also like the practical piece, right? So how am I going to put this into my work? And I'm with a lot of great colleagues right here on this Zoom call, and I know y'all are doing great work in your respective communities. So I would just love for us to come together with this vignette and then talk about, well, what are some of the ways that we could work with this individual? So the vignette is there's a woman named Jill. She's an African-American woman, 32 years old. Now, she had experienced PTSD symptoms for more than 5 years. She consistently avoids thoughts and images related to witnessing her brother being shot and killed at a kickback, or that's a party. Jill indicated that her symptoms have increased since seeing more Black men being murdered online, and she stated that she stays up late watching YouTube videos of all those young Black men being murdered by police officers. So, thinking of this individual, how would you work with this client? And I'm gonna read the vignette one more time, and go from there. But again, her name is Jill. She's a 32-year-old African American woman who has experienced PTSD symptoms for more than 5 years. She consistently avoids thoughts and images related to witnessing her brother being shot and killed, at a kickback. Jill indicated that her symptoms have increased since seeing more Black men being murdered online, and she stated that she stays up late watching YouTube videos of all young Black men being murdered by police officers. How would you work with this client? And I know we're all muted, so if you want to talk, of course, unmute it, and then once you finish, mute it back, so that way we won't have background noise.
Hey, this is Jamie. So, good morning. I just want to say that I think the first thing, after completing, if this is the first meeting with her, completing your assessment, one of the focuses initially or immediately would be to address her staying up and, reliving the trauma over and over, watching the videos. Oftentimes, I even talk to clients about just, hey, I need for you to chill out, and we're not going to look at the news as often because so much negativity and it can, recreate the trauma. But that would be the first thing, hands down, no matter what, because she's just keep exacerbating things.
Okay. And I think about even today, right? When we think about we're in a pandemic. A lot of us are at home. We're being exposed to so much media that, and if you think about it, if you've experienced some trauma in the past, watching this is just going to trigger things for you. And so, thank you, Jamie, for saying that. Sometimes you just need to push back. Limit what you see on a daily basis. Our brain is not meant to see all all those negative stimuli, consistently. It's just not meant for that. Anybody else want to say what they would do?
I think it's important that that also you educate about trauma, just like you did. You educated us first, and then you got into who it affects. It affects all people, but I would also educate about how it's reliving the thing over and over. For example, all of us remembers George Floyd. It came to a point I just could not look at that anymore. I had to just cut it off. And then Ahmaud Arbery, and so it's those images. And so even as clinicians, kind of educating and understanding how to replay like a movie over and over, and educate her on that. And then I guess after you do your assessment, move forward on treatment.
I think Katie, you had unmuted.
Yeah, I did. I have a private practice that I do part-time, and I mostly work with teenagers, especially teenage girls, and then up to through college. And so whenever I'm working with any client, I assume that there's been a trauma. So I use kind of very much of a trauma-informed approach to working. Especially, I've had many clients that have been sexually assaulted, and especially when working with adolescents, I start off using this thing called a trauma tree, because first off, we need to identify what the trauma or traumas are, because a trauma can be a divorce.
Yeah.
And people don't think, think of just physical assault or sexual assault as a trauma. I love what you said. It's how you see it. It's how you perceive it, and you could, you and I could be brother and sister, live in the same house and experience the same thing, but how we respond could be different.
Right.
And so I start with that. And then I have my clients do a trauma narrative where and now I don't do this right off the bat when they're like really able to start doing this. We'll do a trauma narrative. And Miss Melanie Cephas, I see you. It makes me smile. She was my last intern that I had at Baylor. She's wonderful. She just got her MSW and got her license. But anyway, that's my girl. And so I would do groups. I've done groups that we've done trauma narratives. And then with some of my clients, we'll have big poster boards where we're drawing out. If they can't write it, we'll draw it to where they can kind of work through, you put it down on paper, or if they can't, talk to me and I'll write it down. But, to write it. And I had one of my last clients, she ended up going to a placement. She was 11 years old and was sexually assaulted when she was 5. But as she's gotten older, she started to really wrap her mind around what happened. And we did a lot of, writing a letter to her perpetrator. We did not mail it to him, but we tied it to a balloon, and we did a lot of symbolic, but I really am a big advocate of the trauma narrative. And there is a thing online, it's free. It's the Trauma Focus CBT, and it's like a little workbook. And it really takes you step by step on how to do that. And you can work with children through adults using that method.
Yeah. Very good. Anyone else want to share what they would do?
My name's Nancy, and you can tell I'm not Black.
Okay, Nancy.
And so when I'm working with my Black clients who have trauma, we have to address that right up front. We have to talk about the fact that I'm not Black. I don't have the same cellular history. And I'm really a big proponent of Bessel van der Kolk's books on The Body Keeps a Score and cellular memory.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. That's one of, that's a good book.
And so somewhere after we get through the fact that I'm white and I'm old, we have Tamara somewhere jump in here. And so I have to put that on the table that I'm a European mutt. And so I have Irish stuff. So I was probably part of that, but it's not the same. Nobody put me in the bottom of a ship. Nobody took me away from my family. And so I have to get to that somewhere in there that I can't relate to that. And somewhere in there, I always say, but you came from people that survived. And they made, And it depends on my relationship with them. I'll talk about what was it like in the bottom of that ship. And what do you know about the strength and the women whose shoulders you stand on, or usually women I'm talking to. And then what has helped me the most is, and this is how I met Tamara, is we're doing sand tray and people getting to put their trauma in the sand tray with metaphors, because it gives them that much distance. And I have seen some people that cannot talk about it. You know, I don't care what I do and how brilliant I am. They can't talk about it. And so I asked them to pick if you have not been trained in sand tray and you know Tamara, call her up and get trained. There's some people in Houston too, but the power of nobody wanting you to tell them about it, because everybody wants to talk about it, except when you're with vets, they don't want to talk about it. My sister has done honor flight with World War II vets. And some of those folks have never, ever talked about what happened to them until they were with each other at age 80 something on the plane. And I have worked with children of Vietnam and World War II vets who are carrying that trauma in their bodies. So they miss cues of danger. When I read Bessel van der Kolk, I'm surprised any of us walk around vertically because of what we carry in ourselves. And so one of the things, the first and most important thing for me is to be honest in my relationship with that person. And then sand tray has been, I use some art, and I'm an LCSW and a registered play therapist. But the sand tray has been magical. And the one thing I do with a bunch of the guys is I have kinetic sand, and I will hand it to them and they will start talking as they play with it and calm down. Yeah. And that what I've got to do is get them to calm their nervous system when they feel like they have control. I mean, I'm an old white woman, and I have to bet that somewhere in their history, some white person has been a shit to them. And so I have to overcome that. And I told one guy, said, his son was 5, he was being bullied. And he said, I can't have him talk to a white woman, you won't understand. And I said, then let me give you a referral. Yes. Because if dad can't, I can't get through to the kid. Yes. And I wasn't going to try to talk him out of it. And so I think for those of us who are not people of color, we better have good referrals to people who are color that we trust. There's my speech for today. I'll now shut up.
You know, one of the things that I also want to say when I think about the research too, about matching, so matching clinicians to people of color, you know, one of the things that I like to address too is that, you know, we have a lot of similarities, but we also have a lot of differences too. And so like Ms. Nancy said, you know, being able to address the differences in the room, you know, I come from the South. You know, when I was in DC, you know, the East Coast is totally different from the South. So even just the language, you know, I never knew what mo meant. I'm like, mo, was that more or mo? Like, you know, or some of these street terms. And I'm just kind of like, no, we don't say that down in Texas. But, you know, it was helpful to, once we were on that level where we understood each other, you know, the work would be able to progress. So those some great things. You know, I do want to wrap it up by just saying, you know, if anybody has any questions for me, you know, I'm willing to. I'm not the best expert, you know, but like from my colleagues, we have so much, you know, space here, so many great minds that we can, you know, all share. So if you have any questions, you know, that I don't maybe have the answer to, I'm sure there's a lot of people who do on the call, and you know, we love to talk about that. And I'm open it now for questions if there is any. If not, then you know, we can move forward.
Okay, before Dr. Walford, you kind of run off into the sunset. You're not done yet. Okay. Okay. So as I'm listening to you talk and I'm listening to comments being given, I am, and you prefaced your discussion piece, the vignette, from the perspective of individuals seeking counseling services.
Mhm.
We have to recognize the fact that not everyone in the African American community receives counseling services.
Yeah.
In fact, that's one of the challenges that we have in our community because of the stigma that is related to therapeutic work. And so if we think about the members of the African American community and the trauma that we in fact do hold, the presentation of that trauma, the symbolism of the trauma, if you think about the community as a whole, we can't look at everything from a therapeutic, a formal therapeutic perspective.
Yeah.
So what do you say in terms of trauma concerns, trauma work with regard to individuals who are not currently in services, right?
Right.
Because that's the scope of the population that needs to be touched, right? We need to really work with, we need to draw in, we need to appeal to, we need to connect with. Because if we're talking about trauma within the African American community, it's just not individual trauma.
Yeah.
You know, we're a community of people and we share in each other's traumatic experiences. And so how do we angle that? So can you speak to that perspective? You know, those who are not currently seeking services,
Right.
those who don't have any intention, right, to seek out services, but yet is battling with their traumatic experiences, whether it's history, etc. Can you speak to that?
Yes, ma'am. So one of the things I think is very important about our field, and I don't know about everybody's training, but I know in my training I didn't get a lot of it, is the importance of outreach. And what I mean by outreach is that, we have to sometimes go outside of our four walls to go and educate people. Part of being a health educator was doing presentations. So that was something I was very comfortable with. But there are a lot of individuals that are not comfortable with presentations or reaching, going out and reaching people. But I do think that that's part of our work as clinicians. Some of the things that I've experienced or I've done is that I remember one year I partnered with Dr. Monique Marshbell. She's a psychologist at Baylor. And we actually did a series for the whole month for Greater New Light. And basically what we did was we just filmed different topics of mental health. So trauma, anxiety, depression, and we just played it on the screen during, I think it was right before their offering. And so that was one thing that I feel like even if somebody's not seeking help, they're at least being educated about these are the resources that if you do feel like, you can finally want to go talk to somebody, this is what that looks like. I also think about, again, meeting people where they're at. Going to these barbershops. One of the things that I think would be a great outreach experience is going to like barbershops and beauty shops and having those type of talks, and getting that buy-in from the barbers to say, hey man, can we just come as a group just to come rap with you? And let's put our titles aside, It's so I laugh sometimes when people call me Dr. Walford because I worked hard for that degree. But I know that sometimes when not sometimes, but a lot of times when I go into these different settings, saying Dr. Walford is already a barrier. It's like, he's not trying to meet me. He's just, hey, I'm Vincent. I'm a clinician, and this is a topic that we want to talk about, and maybe not using the technical word trauma. What are some things that are just a struggle for you in the past, present, and future? Those are type of the things. So outreach, to answer your question, outreach is just so important, and that we, as clinicians, even though sometimes we get tired, even though sometimes we got so much stuff on our plate, outreach is very important so we can go out there and meet those people where they're at to say like, hey, I know that people have experienced these things. And also know that even if only 2 or 3 people get our message, that's 2 or 3 people who are now, able to say, I'm finally working on my trauma. I don't know if anybody else wanted to share anything, with that, or?
Hi, I'm Tamara.
Hey,
So
Tamara.
I just wanted to share that that's really good, Vincent. One thing that I'm learning as I'm serving more African Americans and just more clients in general is that people really don't have a definition, and they don't really understand that the experience was a traumatic experience,
Right.
because they only think of it in terms of violence, and they think of it in terms of military. So one of the things that I've started doing, just even on my Facebook post, going live every day and talking about things that are impacting family, basically putting language to experiences. And so just saying that, hey, you know, you need to seek therapy. Prayer is wonderful. I 100% agree with it. However, it's not enough, right? And just, you know, trying to educate people about when is it time to seek spiritual counseling versus mental health counseling, and when do we need to, you know, step out and, you know, just to make it more comfortable. And so one of the things that I'm learning is that people will talk about their experiences once you give the experience a language that now they can understand, because you can ask people, is there any history of trauma? Is there any history of mental health issues or diagnoses? And clients will say no. And then later on in the discussion, they'll say, oh, well, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. But they don't consider that a mental health issue. Yeah. And so I try to educate as much as I can. People, my friends, lay people, go on Facebook Live has been wonderful, because it's people who I know personally, and I know that they're not in therapy. And I've had to start saying to people, I'm not your therapist, right? So even if my friends call me,
Boundaries.
I now redirect them and say, hey, it sounds like you need to see somebody, and let me get a referral. I'm a part of lots of networks. Let me get a referral for you. Instead of having them call me consistently and try to talk through the issue, I'm like, no, you need to get professional help. And I can't provide that. I can provide support to you, but I cannot provide you with the interventions that you need to get over the hump.
And that's great. That's a good point, Tamara. It's about boundaries and creating boundaries, creating healthy boundaries. And one of the things too that you mentioned that I just wanted to touch on too was that the importance of a connection with the I can't even think of the word, but like pastors and clergy of some of these church, or the people that we know who have the most connection. And so by doing that and saying, you know, and because one of the things that I understand clergy and pastors and how they want to help, but sometimes it's out of your scope. If you're working with somebody, not even just trauma, but I'm thinking about bipolar disorder. I'm thinking about, you know, schizophrenia. You know, those are things. Yes, you can pray for the individual, but this individual needs to be medicated. And so, and you are not equipped to handle that. So I think it's also good for us as clinicians to partner with some of these clergy to have those type of conversations, to engage, to say, hey, once it's out of your scope, we are referrals, and let's talk about that process and what that looks like. Okay, any other questions? This is good.
Hey, this is Jamie again. Oh, sorry, Marie, go ahead, because I already spoke.
I was just going to say that I liked how you touched on you have to be your best, especially when working with others with trauma. Mm-hmm. Because, well, one, I feel like being a clinician, being in the field, you already looked at like you don't have your own issues, but we're all human. Mm-hmm. So we definitely deal with stuff. It helps us relate. But at the same time, like you said, those issues that we do have, we need to deal with ourselves. 4 years ago, when I was a psychology technician, I worked with a group of ladies who dealt with MST. I also have MST, but I buried it because I was always taught to keep it moving. You know, that's how they raise you. You pray about it, you keep it moving, you okay. But working with those individuals, it made me realize I never dealt with it. Yeah. So I sought the help that I needed in order to be my best self so I could come back and be able to assist others.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you touched on that because that is
No,
important.
and I appreciate you saying that because I think that that is so important. Is that you're right. A lot of times, and I've gotten this a lot too, is that a lot of individuals think that if you're a clinician, you work on yourself and those type of things. But the reason why I can do the work that I do is because I have some great colleagues and support system that really pours into me, and that there's times where I remember when I was in grad school, I had to go see a therapist because I was like, I cannot keep this together. I got my own issue I'm going through. I've gotten death, some death in the family. I'm in grad school. I'm broke. I'm away from my family. I'm just like, if somebody say one more thing, I'm about to explode. And so for me, it was like, you know what? My my supervisor at the time at Howard Counseling Center, she said, "Now, how many times do you see your therapist a week?" I said, "I ain't seen no therapist." She said, "Start Monday. You need to go and find you a therapist." And that was so helpful. And I found myself being my best self,
Mhm.
and I can again manage my own stuff. So I appreciate you, Marie, saying that. Thank you. I think Miss Jamie, you had something.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is more question or a comment, but I was going to touch on just the actual, I appreciate that you did a vignette, and then that, for me, it helps solidify things. Some people don't like them, but it helps me solidify, I guess, what's being spoken about.
Mm-hmm.
But I have heard from multiple people where they're like watching the videos of different African American men or women getting killed, and they'll watch it over and over and over, and they're like, well, but you just become desensitized, so it's like whatever.
Yeah.
And I'll hear that to where it's just another day, it's what happens. And so when things like that are stated, I just want to know, in your practice, are you hearing that often, and do you feel like that's something with someone not addressing their trauma? Are they not acknowledging that they might have their own trauma, or that even watching that could be traumatic in itself?
I think it's all the above, right? I think that what happens is that because so I'll say this. I remember the first, and I had just graduated from college, so this is back in 2005, and I remember I watched Saddam Hussein, I think, when they had put his execution online.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe. And I remember that I had visuals in my head for years. Now, if I were to see something like that, because I've been exposed to it so much, it just doesn't do the same thing for me up here. But when I go to sleep at night, I still see those same visuals. So what I would say is I would push back on that to say, yeah, it's like a latent reaction, right? So right now, you may not feel that experience, but let's say months, years down the road, and all of a sudden something may trigger for you, and that could be because of all the trauma that you have been exposed to in the past. And a lot of times, if we're being honest, that's really how trauma works sometimes. Something happens in the past, we push it down, and then in the future, it may be something that we're not even, our child may be saying something, they got bullied, and bam, it pops up in my head. Man, I remember when I was in 7th grade, and two of these dudes jumped me in the locker room, and I just forgot about it. And that's part of the trauma. So again, I always encourage people to step back, but I talk about that latent response. That yeah, you may not feel it now, but if you continue to put that in your mind, you may experience it somewhere in the future.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Anybody else? Yes, Miss Nancy.
So I am bothered by some people's I am so upset every time I see the pictures of George Floyd. I mean, I can't watch it. I'm just nauseous. Yeah. And yet I know people that have watched it over and over again and said, so what? Yeah. And this bothers me, the desensitization because of the media to horrific things. Yeah. And I think it has to do with why people aren't reacting to being masked for the pandemic. But I was with somebody that said, oh, that was just TV, that George Floyd thing. And I can't watch it. I can't think about it. I mean, so this desensitization as a society Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and I agree with you, Nancy. I think it goes back to people. It's the what we're exposed to in the media. I mean, it's almost hard for you, and I hear what you're saying, but even for me, it was hard. I didn't watch the George. I didn't watch it at all, but it was so hard for me not to, because even if I go to Facebook just to wish happy birthday to my 13-year-old cousin, it's up there on my feed. I can't go on Instagram. I can't even really get on the news. And so part of what I tell people, part of how I live my life is I have to protect my peace, and I have to have a boundaries with my peace. And so, and if that means I can't be on social media for a couple months, that means I have to disengage from media. If that means that I have to go back to the old school way of getting a newspaper to find, my news, I'm okay with that, because I have to protect my peace. If not, I will continue to be exposed to things that are just not helpful for me.
Yeah, I watched it all the way through once
Mm-hmm.
because I thought I should.
Yeah.
And then when somebody minimized it, I was able to say, "Did you watch it?
Right.
Did you hear what he said? Did you watch that guy's face?"
Yeah.
But I can't watch it.
Yeah.
But I like what you said. I have to protect my peace. Yeah. Thank you.
No problem. No problem.
I also know, Vincent, that with COVID-19, that's trauma. And if anybody has spent some time,
huge trauma.
We can get ready as clinicians if you're in private practice. I can see that. If somebody survived it, like I have a friend, he turned 66 yesterday. He was on a ventilator for 3 weeks. And so that's a whole new set of trauma and issues. And since it affects the marginalized Latino population, African Americans, that's a whole other thing that we're going to be dealing with. And also these kids going back to school.
Right.
That's going to be trauma as well, because it's the unknown. These kids, I don't think the little young ones really probably understand. And they see their parents and the devices. And so I can just see a culmination of things happening in the future that we're probably going to have to be prepared for and educated and become trauma informed, because it's going to come in all sort of ways, even at me at Baylor and my college students. Mm-hmm. That's trauma, in the halls and the dorms, everybody trying to be safe. So I can really see this affecting not only people of color, but just all walks of life for years to come. And it's sad, but it's an important fact in the treatment of trauma.
And one of the things that I had to do around COVID, and I'm glad you brought this up, Trina, was that for me, I had to learn how to be more sympathetic to people, because we're all really trying just to manage. Because I was thinking about, I have a cousin who's 6 that lives with my grandparents, and my grandparents are in their 80s. And so when I'm thinking about the school system that they're in, saying that they're possibly going back to school, I'm so frustrated by that, because I'm like, you're not thinking. But if we're being honest, nobody knows the best way, because I also think about some of these students who need more assistance. And parents aren't teachers. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, that's why certain people go to school to be in education, because they enjoy teaching students. And so there's some people who are just not equipped. And so it's like, so then does your students suffer, because you're at home and you're stressed out about studying? I mean, about teaching your child who may have some type of learning disorder? Or do you send them to school and possibly get them exposed to something that could bring back to the home? So I just had to learn how to be more sympathetic, show more empathy. And I'm a work in progress. God ain't done with me yet. I was in the grocery store last week and there was somebody in there without a mask and I almost lost it. But that's because, Trina, it goes back to what you're saying. I'm traumatized by this. I don't want to get COVID-19. I don't want anybody to get COVID-19. I have a lot of friends who have got it, who have, thankfully all been recovered. But in my mind, it's like, well, I'd be the person that would be on the ventilator for 2 months. You know what I'm saying? And so it's so traumatic. But, I do think, again, that's part of, one, setting our boundaries, doing our own work, finding our peace, but also just being empathetic to the pandemic itself. It's just something that we're just going to work through it. Any other questions? Okay.
So can we go back to the vignette?
Sure.
The young lady who watched her brother, she was, you said this was a teenager?
No. I said this is, and let me say, this is something that was make believe. I did a Google search last week and found it. So this was it was a 32-year-old African American woman who had witnessed her over five years ago. Witnessed her brother being shot and killed in a kickback.
Okay. I was thinking about it from a young person's perspective.
But we can. I mean, that's part of this too. So let's say this person is what, 16? Let's say she's 16.
So what I
15?
was thinking about was just if you can speak to the impact or the influence that trauma has on identity formation.
Mhm.
Can you speak to that? Self-worth and such. Can you speak to?
Yeah, I can try. Right. So one
speak
of
to
the
the connection, how that's interrelated.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think about is some of the work that I've done, a lot of work I've done with trauma has been with veterans, right? And so these are individuals who have experienced some form of trauma, but a lot of times when you think about the identity formation, I think about even as adults, now their new identity is that now I'm the survivor of trauma and what that looks like. There's always a lot of times there's a lot of guilt, survivor guilt, that I was able to survive and move on with my life, and my individual, one of my friends didn't. I think about, even if we're going to use the vignette with Jill, let's say she is 14, 15, and she experiences her brother being murdered. Part of that could be is that, some of the things that she may see herself as is somebody who is not worthy of love because she lost somebody that she loved. It could be, like I said, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. And those things, if that's how we see ourselves every day, we live our life in a way that's not happy, and so, and other things can, happen, like depression, anxiety, trauma, PTSD, all those things. And so, again, we're working with those individuals. You're right. Part of is, so how can we formulate this new identity for you? Yeah, you are, instead of maybe a victim of trauma, maybe you're now a survivor of trauma. And surviving trauma is totally different for some people from being a victim. And so I hope that was a good way to explain that. But if anybody else has any response to that, about identity and trauma and what that looks like.
Yeah, I would love to hear any other thoughts. If anyone else have any thoughts about that, feel free to chime in.
Dr. What's her name? Out of New Orleans. This is Andrew Wilson from Louisiana. She wrote the book Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. You guys may have heard of that. She speaks of that, I think she uses the phrase no esteem instead of low esteem. And I read that book some time ago, but you may want to refer to that book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. She has a PhD in social work out of the state of Louisiana. You can YouTube her too, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and she talks about that. She talks about that subject.
And that Joy McGraw?
Yeah,
There you go.
DeGrew.
Yeah.
It's DeGrew.
He's a friend of ABSW as well.
It's Joy DeGrew, and I
That's
do
it.
appreciate you for mentioning that. I do have that book. I actually have connected with her. But thanks. That is a good reference. So if anybody's interested, I'll go ahead and I'll put a link in the chat. So if anyone's interested in getting that book.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I have a question.
Yes, Miss Nancy.
What advice would you give to, so I tell people I'm not black, I'm pink. For pink people, it has to, so when my daughter was in second grade, she was bused as part of integration, and these little boys told her she couldn't play on the playground because she wasn't black. If she was white, she had to stay on the stripes. And so we had this long conversation, and I said, but you're not white. This piece of paper is white, you're pink. And those boys are not black, they're brown. And so they can't play on the blacktop either. And so in our family, we're pink people. So what advice would you have for pink people or people that are not people of color on working with African Americans who have that slave post-traumatic? I'm open to any advice and any insight that would help me be a better clinician.
Yeah.
Because I've just finished reading White Frailty, and I am as guilty as hell about this, of things I didn't know.
One of the things, Nancy, I think that's important that you just said, is working on your own bias and what that looks like as you're coming into the room. And I think that that's definitely helpful to just kind of see, like, you know, what were some of my past thoughts about, you know, people of color, and how does that play out in some of my in my therapy? You know, I think about a good example of this was I had worked with the individual. I had a colleague who said that she had asked this individual, well, growing up, you know, what sports did you play? And so she said the client was a young black man who said, we didn't have money for sports. And so she said she felt so bad about that, because her assumption was, well, everybody plays childhood sports, right? But that's also a privilege. So I think about the whole power privilege thing. I think about our own bias. And I think once, you know, I would encourage people, as you say, pink people, to do that type of work first. And I think that gives them a better experience of going into individuals who have this past historical trauma. And again, not saying that you will probably get to understand everything that happens, but you can at least say, I hear you, and I'm open, and I want to listen about your experience. And I think, and that's been a lot of what a lot of people of color who have of my clients who have said, who have had, you know, white clinicians who said, I just wanted them to listen. They could just listen. That could just be the start. And so, so I would definitely encourage that. And I don't know if anybody else has anything else they would like to chime in on with that.
You know what comes to mind is that we live in a, you know, you hear people talking all the time, I don't see color, you know, and I think that that's a false premise. Yeah. America has always been a colored society. You know, if you're black, get back, you know, and so forth. And so that's not true. So if you're pink, if you're white, if you're butterscotch, if you're teas and tan, you still have certain privileges in our society, because that's a construct that we have resided in. And I mean, it's an ugly reality, but that's as American as apple pie. It really is, and that's all I have to say to that. Is that, you know, if your kids are pink, they still gonna have privileges over children who are chocolate, or you know, I don't know if that helps at all, but that's my thought for today.
You know, and I appreciate that, and I think about just kind of when I think about these type of conversations around kind of equity, inclusion, diversity, those type of things. You know, I love the part of where we get to educate each other, because a lot of times, I know for me, I don't understand how some people kind of process things, right? And so that's been helpful for me to learn that, like, oh, okay, so that's how you are processing that. And so, and maybe that's part of the conversation too, is just having these open talks about, so how do you process race? How do you process color? You know, I always remember when I was at the VA, there was a white postdoc and we were walking, and I remember walking into the room, and they must have told the veterans that you're going to have a postdoc who's a doctor and somebody who's a social worker. And I was surprised. Everybody thought that I was a social worker. And I think it was because, and which was fine, but I think it was because in their mindset, they process terminal degrees. They process, all these things from a very Euro way of thinking. And all that stuff was something that we had to talk about. That stuff that me as a Black, male psychologist, I had to process in my own stuff. I had to do my own work about that, because for a lot of times it's like, I'm not going to APA because when I go there, I'm going to be the only Black person, the only Black male, or when I do some of these different talks, it's just, let's put the Black male out there. That's stuff I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis because that's the position I stepped in. And so I work on my own stuff daily. I like I said, I love having people around me who support me because if not, I wouldn't know how to do my job. So, yeah.
I have a statement.
Yes,
I have a statement also on white frailty.
yes,
I'm reading that book also. And one of the problems is that white people have a problem talking about race. Now, we have a problem talking about it if they're present, which we don't need to feel any kind of way. They look at that as a Black problem, racism. That's a Black problem. That doesn't affect me. So if you ask them, what does it mean to be white? They really can't explain it because they never had to deal with any diversity in their whiteness other than being born into privilege. And they can't readily admit to that because they don't understand that, because they don't know what it is to live any other way. So it's just, it's an issue that, and I'm glad to see some people that are here today because we do need to talk about what is whiteness and why is it so hard to talk about. They're here today, but there's so many people that will not come to the table and talk about it because they cannot reckon with what it means to be white.
yes, ma'am.
So it has been humbling. And as you can tell, I'm old. It has been humbling realizing the things. So what changed for me is I moved from Chicago to Arkansas. Totally different world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have and I'm a former military wife. So I've learned, like in South Carolina, if I didn't want to answer, I said, I'll just ask my husband and blah, blah. But I am late to the realization of how much I didn't know. My daughters are both much more aware of their own biases, which I will take credit for making sure that when I started on my learning curve, I shared it with them. But so I've been watching that football player, difficult conversations with, what's his name? I can't remember his name.
The one that's kneeling?
Yeah.
Kaepernick?
No, not
Kaepernick,
Kaepernick.
yeah.
And so the thing that hit me the hardest was when one of the Gaines children asked him, "Are you afraid of white people?" And I sat with that for about 3 days. That had not crossed my mind. And I think I'm really glad you keep emphasizing, Vincent, about doing your own work, because each time I have one of these realizations, and then I talk to my therapist about it, and a couple of my friends who are people of color and are therapists, and who are very honest and direct with me. Right. And they'll call me on my shit on a regular basis. and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah.
Because I'm learning. So the first book I read in college was Black Like Me.
Mhm.
That was mind-boggling on the stereotypes of people of color. I mean, and I'm frustrated with my peers that they still don't get it.
Yeah.
That they don't get that they have biases because they think they're clinicians and they've taken care of all of them. And so I feel so blessed by hearing this and absorbing it. And I don't know where it's going to take me, but thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Nancy, for that input. We really appreciate it, both of you. Dr. Walford, we're going to try to wrap it up now because it's almost close to that time.
Yeah.
So thank you. Jamie?
Let me come on.
Are you ready for your?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Hey, hello, everybody.
Jamie,
Okay.
can I just say one thing right before
Yes.
you?
Go right ahead.
I just
Go
want
right
to say, I know that this is y'all's first time, but I definitely do appreciate this experience. I do think that y'all are forming something great in Central Texas. My only, I guess, feedback would be just to stick with it. We know how some of these things happen where it starts out really good and, then we kind of fall on the wayside. I've been in plenty of organizations where you just you get frustrated with things, but I think that this is definitely something that is beneficial, especially for Central Texas. So just want to really continue to encourage y'all to keep doing the work. I'm glad we got people from all over the states, Arkansas, Chicago, Louisiana, everywhere. And I think that shows the work that y'all been doing. So I just want to say, good luck with that.
Thank you so much for saying that. Also, we've been working pretty hard. We were just talking about that. What was that, Tuesday or Wednesday, whichever day that we met again. So we were just talking about from start to now, not finished, but start to, execution. Just looking back at the work that it takes just to get here. So it's awesome. And to have all of you here, that is just, it is amazing. And sometimes you just need to take a step back and go, hey, something is happening. So we are getting work done. So thank you for saying that. I wanted to take just a couple minutes, and I know that it's almost noon, so we want to be mindful of everybody's time, but I wanted to take a couple minutes just to talk about membership and really to extend an invitation to those who are interested in ABSW. We were discussing previously, keeping this for Central Texas, and but then with the pandemic and opening things up, so it's we're all in transition. But I wanted to talk really just about what membership looks like. If I have time, answer a couple questions, but really we want to get your information so we can reach back out to you later on. But I wanted to say that our focus is addressing social issues that are affecting the African American communities, affecting folks who are of African ancestry, and we want to make sure that we are targeting that population within Central Texas. We serve, I just went blank. How many counties is it, Dr. Schmel or Marie? Anyone? Is it 7?
7 or 8.
8.
So we're going to serve 8 counties. We are trying to include as many folks as we can. And right now, the active ABSW chapters in Texas are Central Texas, which is us, and then also Houston. Dallas did have a chapter. They dissolved a little bit ago, and they might get theirs back up, but we have actually heard interest from people in Dallas who want to join our chapter. And we have folks that do work in Waco and Temple and this area in our counties, and they live in the Dallas, Waxahachie, Fort Worth area. So those folks are welcome. But I really wanted to say that if you are wanting to be a member, you do not, well, let me say this first. You do have to be a person of African ancestry if you want to join ABSW. But with that being said, we are going to partner with other organizations in the community, and we also are going to have guest speakers and things like this where we do want input from everyone. So there will be open invitations for things, but to be a member of our chapter, you do have to be of African ancestry. You do not have to be a social worker to join. But you do, like I said before, you do have to be of African ancestry. You do not have to live in Central Texas at this time. And we can talk a little bit more about that. We really want to get your information so we can reach out. I wanted to just focus on the fact that we are trying to build up our community. I wanted to just give a little narrative, and I know Trina's been in Waco for forever, and I'm going to speak from Waco because that's been my experience for the past, I'm not going to say how long, for half of my life now. But when I moved to Waco, one of the things that we were told at Baylor was this is the 5th poorest city in Texas, and it has one of the highest ratios of church to per capita area, but we have such a high, just high population of poverty in this small area. We do have, and just to see the juxtaposition, almost from street to street in certain areas, living on the Baylor campus that was very much so affluent, and then I would see people who looked like me right across the highway who, it just looked underserved and things weren't happening and things weren't moving. And so a passion of mine has been to how can we lift up and help this community that is not forgotten at all, but we just need to see more people that look like us going into the community and really helping and really trying to reach down and pull people out or open their minds. And like Dr. Walford was saying, even if we're going to just educate and reaching 2 people out of the 20 that are there, how can we reach those 2? So that is one of the things that we are trying to do here with our organization. I do want everyone, I do want everybody to know that we appreciate you being here, but if you are interested in membership, I have, and I've been sending, I think I sent it to, hold on, I just went blank. I sent it to Miss Tamra, the application link, our FAQ sheet. So what do dues look like? And just a quick rundown. Dues are $75 if you are a general member. Dues, and then if you are retired, if you're a student, it's $45, and then if you're retired, it's $30. If you affiliate with us and become a member on our level, we are affiliated with the National Association of Black Social Workers, and there are benefits to that. But like I said, I will send you out, either myself or Trina, one of us, any of us will send out an FAQ sheet. We'll also send out the application link, and just be present to answer any questions. Just quickly, do y'all have any questions specifically about membership?
Well, if everybody could please put your email in the chat and your name so we can at least send you a newsletter and let you know when the next meeting will be. And also you can suggest topics that we could talk about, and that would be great. So if you could just put your email and your names in the chat, and we also want to be able to send you guys in a few days a survey so you could put this information down and see how we did, and also give us some feedback on other topics. This was a great topic, Dr. Walford. Thank you so much. We might have to do a part 2, but it was definitely needed. Thank you.
No problem. No problem.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Check in the chat on how to get in touch with us with our email. I'm excited. This is a great conversation. I'm thankful for the safe place we created to maybe talk about things that might have been uncomfortable, but this is what is needed, and this is where it starts. And so I want to thank Vincent for doing such a phenomenal job.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I'll hand it back to Marie and we can close out.
Marie, before you close us out, we have our Houston rep on this Zoom call. So I really want Sandira to take a moment if she has something she wants to share with everyone really quickly. Sandira?
Yes, good morning. Good morning, family.
Hello.
I'm just so very excited. I was just getting ready to jump off of here and get ready to zoom into AB Sci. They have a noon workshop as well, but I'm just so impressed with the work that you all are doing and welcoming y'all to the family. This is a great inaugural effort, Dr. Cheval, and I just am so pleased. But I did want to update you, there is a DFW chapter. They are forming as we speak. We did a workshop and an informative with them about a week and a half ago. And we had 66 people on the Zoom. So ABSW's word and the purpose and the vision and the things that we're doing for our community is getting out. So I just wanted to compliment you and kudos again to the work. And the Dr. Vincent, I wanted to remember you said Vincent versus Walford.
Yeah.
I'm so impressed with the work that you shared with them. And
thank you.
Complicated work, but was well received and so easy to process. So I thank you again, and I look forward to part 2, as they say. So I'm get on off unless you have some questions for me. Family, anything y'all want to share or give me some feedback on?
No, thank you so much, Sandira. I really appreciate it. Enjoy your next meeting.
All right, and I'll talk with you soon.
Yes, ma'am. You take care.
And I know that Shreveport was on the call, Dr. Well, I want to give you a Dr. Wilson, Andrew Wilson, and his family. He's a strong clinician in the Shreveport area, and he, as well as his wife, were sitting in and brought some new insight to the conversation. So I have to really appreciate y'all for that. So with all that said, family, I will see y'all next time.
Bye.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us for our first meeting. And we'll be doing this once a month, every first Saturday of the month, unless something comes up, but we'll send out an email or whatnot. So if you have not already, please give us your name, your email addresses, so we can be in touch, whether that's for membership or if you just want to be a part of these talks for future reference. Thank y'all once again, and everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you, Dr. Vincent.